My name is Margaret. I'm 27 years old. Until a few weeks ago, I was just an ordinary kindergarten teacher trying to make ends meet in a small apartment. My salary barely stretched to cover rent, groceries, and the occasional coffee from the cafe down the street. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, simple, predictable, safe. What gave it warmth were my grandparents Elizabeth and Harold. They were my real home in every sense that mattered. Growing up, my parents Richard and Diane were always physically present but emotionally absent. My father lived for his job, clocking 60-hour weeks, more interested in his promotion track than his children. My mother lived for appearances, chasing social circles and hosting dinners, where she smiled for strangers more than she ever did for us. They gave me the basics, but never the affection I craved. It was my grandparents who filled that void. From the age of 5, I spent every weekend and summer at their house. Their 4-bedroom home sat on 3 acres of land with a garden that seemed alive in every season. Grandpa would kneel in the soil, showing me how to plant tomato seedlings, dirt smudging his old work shirts. Grandma would pull me into the kitchen, flour dusting her apron, teaching me how to roll cookie dough. They came to every school play, every soccer game, those small milestones my parents always missed. Despite their wealth, they lived modestly. You wouldn't know they owned a logistics empire, Alexander. Logistics, a company they built from a single truck in the 1970s into a regional powerhouse. Grandpa still drove the same faded blue pickup, its leather seat cracked with age. Grandma clipped coupons at the kitchen table, laughing at how silly it was to pay full price when you didn't have to. Money is just a tool, Margaret, she'd always say, not a measure of your worth. Use it to build, not to impress. That philosophy drove a permanent wedge between them and my father. He was their only son, and he grew up expecting to inherit everything. Lavish houses, unlimited credit, a golden path. Instead, he got discipline, structure, and the expectation to earn his place. They paid for his college, yes, but demanded he work summer jobs. They gave him a down payment for a starter home, not the luxury condo he wanted. When he demanded a senior position at the company, they refused. He stormed out taking another corporate job, and from then on, every word he spoke about them dripped with resentment. I still remember being 10 years old, hiding behind the banister as my father yelled at Grandpa during one rare family dinner. You're stingy, old-fashioned. What's the point of all this money, if not to live big? Grandpa's face stayed calm, but I saw the hurt in his eyes. That night, Grandma tucked me into bed at their house and whispered, "Never measure love in dollar signs, Margaret." Even at that age, I felt caught in a battle I didn't understand. For me, they offered something different. They paid for my education, completely freeing me from debt. They never pushed me into business or law. Instead, they encouraged me to follow my heart. When I told them I wanted to teach kindergarten, Grandma clapped her hands like I'd announced I was becoming a queen. The world needs more patient hearts, not just hungry ones, she told me. And so, I built my life simply. My apartment was small, but filled with secondhand furniture I'd chosen myself. Plants lined the windowsill, books stacked in messy towers. On Sundays, I always went to my grandparents for dinner. We'd share roast chicken or soup, and I'd help them with little things, setting up their smartphone, showing them how to video chat. They'd hand me recipes written in Grandma's looping script, or stories of their youth scribbled on old notepads. I didn't realize until later that they were leaving me breadcrumbs of who they were, pieces of a legacy bigger than wealth. But I'd be lying if I said I never noticed the friction. My mother resented my closeness to them. She once snapped at me during Christmas dinner. "Do you have to make it so obvious you prefer them over us?" My brother Jason, younger than me, by 2 years barely hid his disdain. He called me teacher, pet behind my back, mocking how Grandma and Grandpa gave me practical gifts, new winter tires, a sturdy blender. He preferred the cash handouts they slipped him reluctantly. Looking back, I can see the fault lines had been there for years. A family divided not by distance but by values. My grandparents lived simply even while sitting on millions. My parents and Jason lived for appearances even when drowning in debt. And me, I lived in between, too small to hold both worlds, too loyal to choose. 6 weeks ago, all of that changed. But before that night, before the phone call that split my life into before and after, I was just Margaret, a teacher who believed her world was steady. If I had known what was coming, how money could strip masks away, how family could turn predator overnight, I would have clung harder to those ordinary evenings. To the smell of lemon verbena in Grandma's kitchen. To Grandpa's off-key whistle as he polished the old furniture. to the peace of being loved for who I was, not for what I had. But the storm was already gathering. I just hadn't seen the clouds yet. It was a Tuesday night when the call came. I had been sitting at my desk, red pen in hand, grading picture book essays about my favorite animal. My classroom's fluorescent light buzz still lingered in my ears. The phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Miss Foster. The voice on the line was low, official, detached. I'm Officer Daniels with the State Highway Patrol. I'm afraid there's been an accident involving your grandparents. My pen fell from my fingers. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Accident, I whispered, my voice foreign even to me. He didn't sugarcoat it. A drunk driver ran a red light. Their car was struck on the driver's side. They didn't survive. For a long moment, silence swallowed everything. Then the sound of my own breathing, harsh and shallow. Are you sure? I asked, as if my question could reverse reality. They died instantly, he said, and though he tried to sound reassuring, those words sliced like glass. They didn't suffer. I hung up without remembering how. The walls of my apartment blurred, closing in. My chest ached as though my ribs had collapsed. I had never truly understood what it meant to be orphaned until that night. My parents were alive, yes, but the people who had raised me, loved me without conditions, were gone in a blink. The funeral came 3 days later. It was raining that morning, the kind of steady cold drizzle that soaks you no matter how hard you try to shield yourself. The church smelled of damp coats and lilies. I sat in the front row, hands knotted together, staring at the closed casket draped in white flowers. That's when I realized grief wasn't always private. Sometimes it became a stage. My Aunt Pam wailed so loudly that heads turned, her tears streaking perfect foundation. But when a neighbor's phone camera pointed away, she dropped the sobs like a forgotten prop. My mother complained to the funeral director about cheap arrangements until he reminded her of the cost paid in full by my grandparents years ago. Jason scrolled through his phone, smirking occasionally at texts he found more important than the eulogies. I sat frozen, my tears quiet, my grief too raw to perform, every detail etched into me, the hollow echo of hymns, the way my father shook hands with guests like he was hosting a business event, not burying his parents. I overheard him at one point, whispering harshly into his phone near the church doors. Finally, we can settle this. I won't let her walk away with everything. His words sliced through me, though I pretended not to hear. At the time, I convinced myself I misheard. Later, I would know better. The burial was worse. The earth was heavy with rain, swallowing the caskets too quickly. When the final prayer was said, I lingered, unwilling to leave them in the ground alone. My parents stood impatiently a few yards away, umbrellas angled like weapons. My father checked his watch. My mother muttered, "Traffic's going to be hell if we don't go soon." I wanted to scream at them. Don't you feel this loss? Don't you feel the silence where their laughter used to be? But the words stuck in my throat. Back at the reception, the hypocrisy thickened. Relatives I hadn't seen in years approached with rehearsed grief. They were such generous people. One cousin sniffled before pocketing a silver napkin ring as if it were a souvenir. Uncle Steve hovered behind Pam like a shadow, nodding to everything she said but offering no words of his own. When I slipped into the kitchen for air, I caught my mother rifling through a jewelry box she'd claimed from Grandma's things, muttering, "She would have wanted me to have this." My stomach twisted. Even before the will was read, the scavenging had begun. That night I returned to my apartment, alone. The silence pressed harder than any sound. I lay awake, replaying memories, Grandpa's whistle in the garden, Grandma's lemon bars cooling on the counter. I tried to imagine a world without them, and couldn't. 2 weeks crawled by. I drifted through days teaching on autopilot nights filled with restless half-sleep. My students asked why I looked so sad, and I forced a smile. How could I explain that the only people who made me feel safe in this world were gone? Then came the call from Matthew Goldstein, their attorney. His voice was calm, steady, with a warmth that felt out of place against the storm inside me. "Margaret," he said gently, "your grandparents updated their will last year. It's time we gather your immediate family to read it." I agreed, though my heart thudded with dread. I didn't care about money. But I knew my father. I knew my aunt. I knew what wealth did to them. And a part of me already sensed what was about to be revealed, that the grief I felt was nothing compared to the greed that was about to surface. The morning of the will reading was gray drizzle painting the windows as if the sky shared my mood. I arrived early, clutching the umbrella Grandma had insisted I keep in my car. Her voice echoed in my mind. Always be prepared. "Margaret, Rain comes when you least expect it. Inside, the law office smelled faintly of leather and old wood. Matthew greeted me with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake lingered. Elizabeth and Harold often spoke of you, he said softly. They loved you dearly. I managed a small smile, but my throat burned. The door opened behind me. My family swept in like a storm, my father first commanding, as always checking his watch. My mother trailing behind, designer bag, swinging like a trophy. Jason with sunglasses indoors, smirking at nothing. Aunt Pam talking too loudly on her phone. Uncle Steve trailing silent as ever. The air thickened. My father didn't bother with pleasantries. Let's get this over with, he snapped. Some of us have businesses to run. Matthew led us to a polished oak table. The chairs creaked as we sat. I chose a seat near him, instinctively seeking safety. My father claimed the end like a throne, my mother at his side. Jason sprawled like he was at a poker game. Pam whispered furiously into her phone until Steve nudged her quiet. Matthew cleared his throat. Before I begin, I want to state for the record that Elizabeth and Harold were of sound mind when they finalized this will. Multiple doctors confirmed their competency. They were deliberate in every decision. My father scoffed. Just read it, Matt. We all know how this goes. I'm their son. Standard inheritance procedure. But I noticed something in Matthew's eyes, then a flicker, almost pity. And for the first time, I felt the shiver of what was coming. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here. The conference room smelled faintly of polish and dust, like time itself had settled here to wait for the truth. I sat with my hands clasped too tightly in my lap, the umbrella I'd carried dripping quietly in the corner. Across the table, my father leaned back in his chair with the smugness of a man who believed the outcome was already written in his favor. Matthew Goldstein adjusted his glasses and opened a thick leather folder. His voice was steady, practiced, but I sensed something in it, a carefulness, like he knew what was about to happen would fracture everything. He began with the formalities. I, Harold Alexander, and I, Elizabeth Alexander, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this our last will and testament. The language stretched on legal and dry about revoking prior wills and appointing executors. My family shifted impatiently, sighs and shuffles filling the room. Jason tapped his phone under the table, ignoring every word. Aunt Pam leaned toward my mother, whispering, "We'll finally be able to move into that neighborhood with the good schools." And then finally the words that split the air. We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including, but not limited to, all cash assets, totaling approximately $8 million, our investment portfolio valued at approximately $12 million, all real estate holdings valued at $5 million, and our 25% ownership in Alexander Logistics valued at $1 million to our beloved granddaughter Margaret Grace Foster. The silence was deafening. My ears rang, my breath caught halfway up my throat and refused to move. I looked around. My father's jaw clenched so hard a vein pulsed at his temple. My mother's eyes widened, her painted lips parting in a gasp that quickly twisted into outrage. Jason sat upright for the first time all morning, his sunglasses slipping down the bridge of his nose as if even they couldn't shield him from the shock. Aunt Pam froze mid-whisper, her phone still in her hand, eyes darting toward me with a sharpness that felt like a knife. Me. They left everything to me. Matthew's voice continued calm against the storm breaking around me. We specifically and intentionally make no provision for our son Richard Alexander, our daughter-in-law Diane Alexander, our grandson Jason Alexander, our daughter Pamela Davis, or her husband Stephen Davis, as we have provided for them during our lifetime and have made our reasons clear to our attorney. It was my father who broke the silence first. He shot to his feet so violently his chair clattered backward. "This is a joke," his voice shook with fury. "Let me see that." He snatched the document from Matthew's hands, eyes scanning frantically as though a mistake might reveal itself in the fine print. "This is ridiculous!" My mother's voice sharpened into hysteria. $26 million to a kindergarten teacher. She doesn't have the first clue how to manage money. Jason slammed his palm onto the table. "What about me? I'm family too. I need capital for my business ventures." His voice cracked with entitlement, as if need alone was justification. Aunt Pam leaned forward, her face blotchy red. "What did you do, Margaret? How did you manipulate them into this?" I sat frozen mouth dry, unable to speak. My hands trembled beneath the table. Manipulate them. These were the people who raised me, loved me, and now in death they'd chosen me, and somehow that choice had painted me as an enemy to the rest of my blood. Please, Matthew said firmly, reclaiming the will from my father's shaking hands. There is more. He pressed a button on a small remote, a hidden screen lowered from the wall flickering to life. And there they were, my grandparents, sitting side by side on their familiar floral sofa, Grandpa's arm draped over the back. Grandma's hands folded neatly in her lap, alive, smiling softly. My heart clenched so tight it hurt. For a moment I couldn't breathe. If you're watching this, Grandpa began, his voice steady, then we are no longer with you. His eyes twinkled even in the recording, but his jaw was set with resolve. We want to speak plainly to avoid misunderstandings. Grandma nodded. Her voice was gentle but unflinching. Richard Pam, we love you as our children, but we have been deeply disappointed by the values you've embraced and the way you've treated family. Money became your god, and relationships your currency. That is not the life we worked so hard to build. My father's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, but Matthew silenced him with a raised hand. You will listen, he said firmly. On screen, Grandpa continued. We built Alexander Logistics not for riches, but to provide security and opportunity. We believed in hard work, integrity, treating people fairly. Margaret has lived by those values. You have not. Grandma's eyes glistened. Margaret visits us because she cares not, because she wants something. She chose a career helping children despite the low pay because it fulfills her. She is the only one we trust to honor our legacy. The words cut through the room like a verdict. They're senile, my father erupted, his voice cracking. They were manipulated. No judge will uphold this insanity. But Matthew was ready. Your parents anticipated that argument. They underwent extensive cognitive testing before finalizing this will. Multiple doctors certified their competence. His voice hardened. I strongly advise against contesting. You would not win. My mother's tone softened, suddenly, sickly sweet. Margaret, darling, you understand this isn't right. Your grandparents were confused. This money belongs to the family, not just you. You'll share it, won't you? Her eyes glistened with practiced tears. Don't tear us apart over this. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their stares pressing me into my chair, the air thick and suffocating. My heart pounded in my ears. What could I say? I hadn't asked for any of this. I would have given back every dollar to have my grandparents alive again. My voice faltered. I need time to think. Think, Jason sneered, leaning across the table. There's nothing to think about. That money needs to be divided fairly, or at least handled by someone who knows business. Dad will manage it. Yes, my father snapped. That's the only reasonable option. The arguments rose, voices overlapping into chaos. Accusations, demands, threats. The air vibrated with hostility. Then Matthew's calm voice sliced through. Enough. He slid a thick envelope toward me. Margaret, here are the estate documents, keys to the properties, and contact information for financial advisors. You do not need to decide anything today. Take your time. The meeting dissolved into shouting. My father's face twisted with rage as he hissed, This discussion isn't over. Come to the house tonight. 6 o'clock. We'll sort this out as a family. His grip on my arm was iron, his words a command, not an invitation. When they stormed out, I sat in the sudden silence, envelope clutched to my chest. My pulse was still racing, the echo of my grandparents' voices still ringing in my ears. They had trusted me of all people. And in that moment, I knew what was meant to be a blessing had just become a curse. The sky was already dark when I pulled into my parents' driveway. Their 5,000 square foot house loomed like a fortress, glass, granite, and cold perfection. I gripped the envelope Matthew had given me so tightly, the paper edges bit into my palm. My stomach churned. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with expectation. They had gathered like vultures awaiting a feast. My father stood near the fireplace, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, posture stiff with command. My mother perched on the edge of a cream-colored chair, pearls gleaming under the chandelier. Jason sprawled on the leather sofa, scrolling on his phone like this was a casual hangout. Aunt Pam paced back and forth, her voice sharp as she whispered into her phone, and Uncle Steve hovered by the window, staring out as if he wanted to disappear. Sit down, Margaret, my father said, his voice all business. Not a request. I chose a chair near the door. For the first time, I realized I might need an escape route. My father set down his glass with a deliberate clink. Let's be reasonable. Your grandparents clearly weren't thinking straight. They meant for the family to benefit, not just you. Yes, my mother added quickly, her tone honeyed. Managing that kind of wealth is complicated. Your father has experience. He can handle it properly. You'll still get your share, maybe enough for a real home instead of that tiny apartment. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Jason finally looked up, smirking. Exactly. You don't need all that money. 10% is plenty for you, more than enough for a teacher. 10%, I repeated slowly, barely trusting my voice. That was still over $2 million, but the way they said it, like they were granting me scraps, made my skin crawl. Generous, considering your limited needs, my father said. I'll manage the estate, divide everything fairly. You'll be taken care of. The word generous twisted in my chest. They weren't offering, they were dictating. And what about me? Jason leaned forward, eyes sharp. I need at least $5 million for my startup. It's going to be huge. Cryptocurrency exchange. Groundbreaking stuff. I stared at him. Jason had never held a steady job longer than 3 months. His last groundbreaking idea, an app for rating public bathrooms, had burned through $50,000 of my parents' money before collapsing. Aunt Pam jumped in, her voice shrill. And the house should go to us. My kids deserve access to good schools. That neighborhood. I almost laughed at the absurdity. She hadn't visited Grandma and Grandpa's house in years. Her children barely remembered them. Their words swirled around me like poison. I wanted to scream to tell them the inheritance wasn't theirs to carve up, but my voice felt lodged in my throat. So they changed tactics. You owe us Margaret, my mother said suddenly, eyes shimmering with false tears. After all we've done for you, we gave you life opportunities, a good home, and this is how you repay family loyalty. I almost choked. Loyalty from them. When was the last time either of them had called me just to check in? When had they shown up at my school play? My soccer game, my graduation. But my silence emboldened them. This isn't optional, my father snapped. Voice sharp now. Either you sign over the estate or we'll contest the will. We'll drag your name through the courts. Every interaction you had with them alone will be twisted. Do you really want that ugliness aired in public? His threat hung in the air like smoke. Before I could respond, Uncle Steve cleared his throat. Maybe we should give Margaret time. This is a lot. Stay out of it, Steve, my father barked, eyes flashing. This is family business. Steve went silent again, shrinking into himself. The evening stretched on, hours filled with manipulation. Jason typed up a transfer agreement on his laptop. My mother called their attorney for wording. Aunt Pam flipped through real estate listings for my grandparents' home, already talking about renovations. They carved up my inheritance before my eyes, never once mentioning Grandma's values or Grandpa's legacy. Finally, close to 10:30, my father slid the printed document across the coffee table with a pen. Sign it. Now. I picked up the paper, scanning the words. It was a complete surrender, signing away all rights in exchange for an undefined percentage at his discretion. My hands trembled, but something hardened inside me. No. The room froze. What did you just say? My father hissed. I said no. My voice surprised even me, steady and sharp. I'm not signing. Grandma and Grandpa trusted me with their legacy. I intend to honor that trust. My mother gasped, her mask slipping. Jason's face twisted into a sneer. Aunt Pam clutched her chest like I'd stabbed her. Ungrateful, my mother snapped. We invested in you, your private school braces dance lessons you were terrible at, and this is how you repay us. Invested, I whispered. Like I'm a stock. My father's face darkened. He leaned forward, jabbing a finger inches from my face. You have a choice. Sign and stay part of this family, or refuse and you're disowned. You can't have both. The ultimatum slammed into me like a physical blow. I looked around the room, searching for any flicker of love, of understanding. All I saw were hungry eyes. My decision was clear. I'm not signing. The silence after those words was heavier than any scream. My father stood towering. Then get out. You are no longer welcome here. I swallowed hard. I live in my own apartment. He laughed coldly. The apartment we co-signed because your teacher's salary couldn't qualify for the lease. You think it's yours. We own that building through one of our companies. Consider your lease terminated. My stomach dropped. You have 30 minutes to pack essentials, my mother added, glancing at her watch. The locks change tomorrow. I packed on autopilot. Clothes, documents, toiletries, my grandmother's quilt. My father stood in the doorway like a guard, ensuring I didn't steal anything. My mother's voice floated upstairs, already on the phone, with a realtor about selling my grandparents' house. You were never really wanted, you know, my father said suddenly, his voice flat. Your mother and I nearly divorced before she got pregnant. You were the obligation that tied us together." The words cut deeper than any blade. Jason appeared next, leaning against the wall, smirking. "You'll regret this. Money runs out. Family doesn't. Remember that when you're alone." I zipped my last bag, forcing myself not to cry. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. At the door, they lined up, faces cold. My mother said, "You may have money now, but family is forever. You'll realize what you've thrown away." I looked at them one last time. I'm not the one throwing away family. You are. The door slammed behind me with brutal finality. Standing alone in this driveway, bags at my feet, the night air sharp against my face, I finally let the tears come. In a single evening, I had lost everything: my family, my home, my sense of belonging. And yet deep down beneath the grief and fear, something stirred, a stubborn ember refusing to die. They thought they had broken me, but they had only made me dangerous. The night swallowed me whole as I drove away from my parents' mansion with 3 bags and nowhere to go. Streetlights smeared into golden streaks through my tears. Every mile I put between us should have felt like freedom, but all I could feel was hollow, like someone had scooped my chest clean. Hotels were out of the question. My credit cards were nearly maxed, and anyway, the idea of explaining my situation to a stranger behind a front desk seemed unbearable. Friends, maybe. But who could I call at midnight and say, "My family just kicked me out because I won't give them $26 million. Even in my own ears, it sounded absurd. Then my hand brushed against the thick envelope on the passenger seat. Inside, I remembered, were documents and a set of keys. I pulled over beneath the yellow glow of a street lamp and opened the envelope. The keys were on a rabbit-shaped keychain, my grandmother's. A lump rose in my throat. The keys to their house, their home. The thought both comforted and terrified me. I hadn't been able to step foot in it since the funeral. The idea of walking through rooms still warm with their memory, yet empty forever, was almost too much. But I had no choice. 20 minutes later, I turned into their quiet neighborhood. The porch light glowed faintly, probably still on the timer Grandpa had set years ago. I parked in the driveway, staring at the front door, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. For a long time, I couldn't move. It felt wrong to enter without them waiting inside. Finally, I forced myself out of the car. The key trembled in my hand as it slid into the lock. The door opened with a soft creak, as though the house itself sighed at my return. The smell hit me first. Lemon verbena potpourri, the same scent Grandma always used, mixed with faint traces of wood polish. My knees nearly buckled. I stepped inside, slowly flicking on the hallway light. The house looked exactly as it always had, but frozen in time. The family photos lined the hallway. Grandpa and his worn flannel grandma, with her soft smile, both of them holding me as a baby. My eyes blurred. I walked into the living room, half expecting to hear Grandpa's whistle or see Grandma knitting in her chair. Instead, there was only silence, heavy and accusing. I carried my bags upstairs to the guest room I had always stayed in. Everything was untouched, the quilt neatly folded at the foot of the bed, fresh towels stacked on the dresser, the paperback novel I'd been reading weeks ago still waiting on the nightstand with a bookmark at chapter 7. Grandma had clearly prepared for my next visit. She hadn't known that visit would never come. I sank onto the bed, clutching the quilt to my chest. The weight of grief pressed down, crushing me. I cried until my face burned, until my body trembled with exhaustion. When I finally fell asleep, it wasn't restful. It was the kind of sleep that feels like drowning. I woke with a start hours later. The house was silent, but I could have sworn I'd heard something, floorboards creaking. My heart raced. I sat up listening. Nothing. Just the tick of the hallway clock, but unease prickled at my skin. I grabbed my phone and walked through the upstairs hallway. Every door was closed, just as I'd left them. I forced a shaky laugh. Old houses make noises, I whispered to myself, though my voice sounded small. Back in bed, sleep didn't come. My mind wandered to the envelope's documents. At last, I switched on the lamp and began flipping through them. Deeds, bank statements, contact information for advisors. My grandparents had been meticulous. Tucked between the folders was a handwritten note in Grandma's looping script. "Dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means we are gone. You must feel scared, but remember you're stronger than you know. This house is your sanctuary. It will never betray you. Trust yourself and trust the people who have proven their love, not the ones who demand it. We believe in you." Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the letter to my chest, wishing I could hear her voice again. Sometime near dawn, I forced myself downstairs. The kitchen was spotless, as though Grandma had just finished cleaning. A half-empty jar of her homemade strawberry jam still sat in the fridge. My throat tightened at the sight. I couldn't bring myself to eat. Instead, I wandered into Grandpa's study. His desk was neat pens, aligned papers stacked. On the shelf above, rows of leather-bound journals caught my eye. My hand hovered, but I couldn't open them yet. Not tonight. The grief was still too raw. I closed the door gently and returned to the guest room. Outside the window, the world was shifting from night to gray dawn. I curled under the quilt, clinging to the last piece of them I could hold. But just before sleep claimed me again, I thought I heard a faint sound downstairs. A door. A creak. I held my breath, staring into the darkness. And for the first time, I wondered if someone else had been in the house before me. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the guest room, harsh and unfamiliar. For a fleeting moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw Grandma's quilt draped over me, the unopened novel on the nightstand, and it all came crashing back. My phone buzzed on the dresser, a text from Jason. Enjoying the big, empty house. Not for long. My stomach clenched. The words weren't just petty, they were a threat. I forwarded the message to Matthew, my grandparents' attorney. Within seconds, he called back. "Stay put," he said, his tone clipped with urgency. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone else." The house suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a target. True to his word, Matthew arrived exactly half an hour later, carrying a briefcase in one hand and 2 coffees in the other. His presence filled the kitchen with a calm steadiness I hadn't realized I craved. "First things first," he said, sliding one of the cups toward me. "Your family has already contacted 3 attorneys about contesting the will. I anticipated as much. I've prepared countermeasures." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. "They kicked me out last night. My father owns the apartment building through some company. He made me pack in 30 minutes." Matthew's jaw tightened. Typical Richard tactics control through leverage. But what he didn't tell you is that your grandparents anticipated this exact scenario. He pulled a deed from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "Your grandmother bought a cottage outside town years ago and placed it in a trust under your name. Richard doesn't know it exists. You'll never be homeless, Margaret." Relief washed through me so suddenly I nearly cried. A safe place. A lifeline I hadn't known existed. "There's something else," Matthew said. He leaned back, lowering his voice. "Your grandparents didn't just leave you money. They left you protection. People." As if on cue, a knock sounded at the back door. I stiffened, but Matthew's expression softened. "That will be Carlos." I opened the door to find a man in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair cap in hand. His eyes were kind but serious. "Miss Margaret," he said warmly, "I'm very sorry for your loss. They were wonderful people." I remembered him vaguely. Grandpa's handyman, maybe. "This is Carlos Ramirez," Matthew explained. "He's been the estate manager here for over 15 years. Lived in the guest house on the property." Harold trusted him completely. Carlos nodded. "They asked me to look after things if anything ever happened. The house, the grounds, and you." The simple kindness undid me. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. Carlos joined us at the kitchen table. "Your father and brother," he said carefully. "They came here after the funeral when no one was around. Took some things. Watches, jewelry, electronics." My chest tightened. "How do you know?" "I have it on the cameras." I frowned, remembering my father bragging about installing the system years ago. He set those up. Carlos shook his head. "Harold had me update them last year. He didn't trust the old system. Said it had too many blind spots." Matthew's eyes lit with approval. "Excellent foresight. That footage will be invaluable if they contest." Carlos hesitated, then stood. "There's more. Mrs. Elizabeth kept journals. She documented everything, especially visits from family." He led us down the hallway to Grandma's study. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Built-in shelves lined the walls, filled with neat rows of leather-bound journals, each carefully dated. Carlos pulled one down, handing it to me. "This one mentions last year, when your father asked for $250,000 for cryptocurrency." I opened it, my grandmother's looping script flooding my vision. May 15. "Richard visited today, first time in 7 months. Didn't ask about our health. Pitched a crypto investment. Harold refused. Richard grew angry, accused us of favoring Margaret. Said she only visits to secure her inheritance. Couldn't be further from the truth. Margaret has never asked for money. She brings dinner stays to eat. She doesn't even know the value of our estate. Richard left without finishing his coffee. Harold very upset. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, entry after entry documenting my parents' demands. Jason's schemes, Pam's criticisms of their embarrassing frugality, and in contrast, quiet notes about my visits. Margaret brought cookies. Margaret helped with the new phone. Margaret stayed to play cards. They had been keeping a record, not just of finances, but of character. The doorbell rang suddenly. I jumped. Carlos went to answer it. Moments later, he returned with a woman in her 60s, gray hair, pulled back neatly, wearing a sensible cardigan. Dorothy Reynolds. She introduced herself, hugging me tightly before I could react. I worked here as their housekeeper for 20 years. Elizabeth always said you were the daughter she wished she'd raised. Her words cracked something inside me. My throat burned, but I managed to whisper, "Thank you." Dorothy glanced at Matthew. I brought what Elizabeth asked me to keep safe. She pulled a small box from her bag and set it on the desk. Inside were letters, stacks of them. I picked one at random, my father's handwriting. Each letter a plea for money, some with veiled threats. If you don't help me, don't expect Margaret to visit this summer. Dorothy's mouth tightened. She saved everything, even had me copy emails. Said one day Margaret might need them. Before I could process, the back door opened again. More arrivals. Rosa Martinez, my grandparents' longtime business partner. George Patel, their investment advisor. Sarah Johnson, their neighbor of 30 years, carrying a casserole. One by one, they filled the living room, each with stories, documents, and more importantly, love. They hadn't come for money. They came because they cared. For the first time since the will reading, I felt something bloom inside me, hope. But the moment was pierced by the vibration of my phone. Another text from Jason. Tomorrow at 10. We're coming. Dad, Mom, Aunt Pam, Uncle Steve, and me. We'll collect what belongs to us. Don't try to stop us. I showed it to Matthew. His expression darkened. Threats. Breaking and entering. Perfect. This is exactly what your grandparents prepared for. He made 3 quick phone calls, speaking in clipped tones about evidence, meetings, witnesses. When he hung up, his eyes burned with resolve. Tomorrow morning, he said, we'll be ready. But tonight, Margaret, you need to understand exactly what you're fighting for. He gestured to the pile of journals, letters, and documents spread across the study. This isn't just wealth. It's proof of who your grandparents were and who your family has become. I looked around the room. At Rosa calmly reviewing company files. At George flipping through investment portfolios. At Dorothy setting out coffee mugs like she had 100 times before. At Carlos quietly standing guard near the window. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. I had lost a family, but maybe I had gained another. I barely slept that night. The journals, the letters, the grainy clips of security footage, they sat piled on the dining table like silent witnesses waiting to be called. Each page I turned exposed another betrayal, another proof of how little my parents and Jason valued anything but money. But what unsettled me most wasn't the evidence. It was Jason's text. Better not try to stop us or things will get ugly. I lay awake in the guest room, the quilt pulled to my chin, listening for every creak of the old house. The shadows stretched long, shifting with each gust of wind. At one point, I swore I heard footsteps outside, crunching on gravel. I sat up, heart racing, but when I peered out the window, the driveway was empty. Still, I double-checked the locks before crawling back into bed. By dawn, the house smelled of coffee and toast. Dorothy had returned bustling in the kitchen, like she'd never left. The clatter of pans and the comforting scent reminded me of childhood mornings when Grandma would hum hymns as she cooked. You need strength for what's coming, Dorothy said firmly, sliding a plate toward me. Eat. I managed a few bites, though my stomach knotted with nerves. Matthew arrived soon after, crisp as ever, carrying a folder thick with documents. He spread them across the table with the precision of a general preparing battle plans. These, he said, tapping one stack, are restraining orders ready to file if they threaten you again. These, he gestured to another stack, are cease and desist letters addressing Jason's text. He looked at me. By the time they arrive, we'll be ready. But Margaret, you need to decide, do you want to confront them here or have law enforcement intervene before they step inside? I hesitated. A part of me wanted to avoid them forever, to hide in this house or the secret cottage Matthew had mentioned. But another part, the part that still heard Grandpa's voice telling me, stand your ground, new running wasn't an option. I want to face them, I said finally. My voice trembled, but the decision didn't. Matthew studied me, then nodded once. Then we'll do this on your terms. As he spoke, Rosa arrived carrying her laptop. "The company records are ready," she said. "If they try to claim mismanagement, we'll show otherwise." George followed with binders of investment reports, meticulous and orderly. "Everything they'll try to use against you, we have answers." Carlos checked the locks again, patrolling the house like a quiet sentinel. "Cameras are live," he said. "Every entrance is covered." One by one, my grandparents' allies filled the house, each taking their place without being asked. It felt less like a home now, and more like a fortress, an army assembling not with weapons, but with truth. Still, my nerves frayed. I found myself pacing the hallway, running my fingers along the framed photos. Grandma's smile in the garden. Grandpa's arm around me at my high school graduation. They had been alive in those pictures, proud, radiant. Now they were gone, leaving me to carry their legacy against people who should have been my family. Carlos caught me staring. "You look like Harold when he was nervous," he said gently. I turned. Grandpa got nervous. "Of course. Before big contracts, board meetings, even your school plays. He'd walk the garden 3 times before leaving the house. Said nerves meant you cared." I smiled faintly, the knot in my chest loosening just a little. But the reprieve didn't last. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Jason. "Sleep well, sis. Tomorrow, you'll see what happens when someone steals from family." My hands shook as I showed it to Matthew. He read it silently, jaw tightening. "Good," he said at last. "The more threats they send, the more they weaken themselves." Yet his calm didn't erase my fear. That evening, I sat alone in the study, the journals spread before me. I traced Grandma's handwriting with my fingertips. Each entry felt like she was still speaking to me. Margaret brought soup. Margaret helped Harold with his emails. Margaret stayed until the dishes were done. She had seen me, really seen me, in a way my parents never had. I whispered into the empty room, "I hope I don't disappoint you." The house creaked, the air shifted, and for a second I imagined I felt her presence warm and steady. At 9, Matthew returned from another call, his face grave. "They'll be here by morning." Likely earlier, Judge Henderson has agreed to be present as a neutral witness. Chief Williams, too. "Your grandparents asked for this contingency years ago." I blinked at him. "They planned for this." He nodded. "They knew your father and aunt wouldn't accept their decision, so they created a safeguard, a circle of people who could stand with you when the time came." The idea left me both humbled and terrified. They'd known this war was inevitable. Night settled heavy around us. Carlos volunteered to stay in the guest house to keep watch. Rosa and George left with promises to return early. Dorothy refused to leave at all, claiming Elizabeth wouldn't forgive me if I left you to face them alone. By 10, the house was quiet except for the tick of the grandfather clock. I sat at the dining table staring at the mountain of documents. They were my armor, but paper felt so fragile compared to the anger my family carried. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. My mind spun with images of tomorrow. Jason smirking my father's glare, my mother's crocodile tears, Aunt Pam's shrill accusations. At midnight, I wandered downstairs for water. The silence pressed in, almost suffocating. Then I saw it, a shadow at the edge of the window, gone in an instant. My breath caught. I rushed to the door, yanked it open, nothing. Just the night, the wind, the faint rustle of trees. But I couldn't shake the feeling someone had been watching. Back in bed, I lay awake until the first streaks of dawn crept through the curtains. My phone buzzed again. Another message, short and sharp. "See you at 10. Instead of fear, something else stirred in me. Resolve. They wanted a battle. Tomorrow they'd see me on the field. I wasn't just the quiet teacher anymore. I was Harold and Elizabeth's granddaughter, and I wasn't backing down. By 9:30, the house was no longer quiet. It pulsed with energy. Footsteps on polished floors, the murmur of low voices, the clink of coffee cups Dorothy insisted on serving. Rosa set up her laptop on the dining table, spreadsheets glowing on the screen. George organized thick binders of financial records, color-coded tabs, jutting out like a rainbow of evidence. Carlos moved silently between windows, checking locks, adjusting curtains, his eyes scanning the driveway with the vigilance of a guard dog. Matthew stood at the head of the room, reviewing folders like a conductor preparing an orchestra. His calm steadiness anchored me, but my heart still pounded with nervous electricity. At 9:45, Dorothy pressed a mug of coffee into my hands. "Drink!" She ordered, her tone so familiar it was like hearing Grandma again. "You need to look strong, not shaken." I tried to smile, though my hand trembled around the mug. "I feel like I'm walking into a battlefield." "You are," she said simply, "but you're not alone." The words steadied me. At 9:50, the sound of engines shattered the calm. Tires crunched on gravel, one after another. I peeked through the curtain. 4 cars pulled into the driveway, my father's black sedan first, then my mother's gleaming SUV, Aunt Pam's fire-red convertible, and finally, Jason's flashy sports car. They lined up like a parade of entitlement. "They're early," Matthew murmured, checking his watch, trying to catch us off guard. The doorbell rang once, twice, then impatient pounding followed. Carlos opened it. My father stood at the threshold, his face tight with anger. Behind him, my mother looked brittle lips pressed in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jason smirked like a wolf scenting prey. Aunt Pam bustled forward with manufactured outrage, Uncle Steve trailing like her shadow. "Where's Margaret?" my father demanded. "This is family business." Carlos didn't move. "Miss Margaret is expecting you. Please come in." They swept inside, halting when they saw the living room full of people. Matthew at the head, Rosa with her laptop, George with his binders, Dorothy calmly pouring tea, and me standing in the center bracing myself. "What is this?" My mother's voice was sharp, brittle. "You brought outsiders into a private matter." Before I could answer, the front door opened again. 3 figures entered. Judge Robert Henderson, tall and solemn, his presence commanding respect. Police Chief Maria Williams, her badge gleaming, though her stance was casual. And finally, Thomas Jang, my grandparents' trusted financial advisor for decades. My father's face blanched at the sight of the judge. "Robert," he said, forcing a laugh, "what brings you here?" Judge Henderson's gaze was cold. "Your parents asked me to serve as a neutral witness in case of disputes. I am here at their request." Chief Williams crossed her arms. "I'm here as a friend of the Alexanders, unless someone commits a crime. Then my role changes." The warning in her voice was sharp. For a moment, silence reigned. My father's confidence faltered. I stepped forward, my voice shaking at first, but growing steadier. "I know why you're here. You believe you're entitled to my grandparents' estate. Despite their clear wishes, despite the will, despite the evidence. You think you can intimidate me into giving it up." Jason snorted. "We don't think. We know. That money doesn't belong to you. You're just Enough," Matthew cut in. His voice was sharp steel. "We have documentation of every attempt Richard and Jason have made to access Harold and Elizabeth's assets over the last 20 years. He opened a folder, sliding photos and transcripts onto the table. Unauthorized transfers, forged checks. Even an attempt to declare Elizabeth incompetent when she refused to fund Jason's last failed venture. "That's taken out of context," my father snapped, color rising in his cheeks. Rosa stood. "And the company loan you never repaid Richard, $200,000 in 2012 for your Aspen vacation home. Your parents never pursued repayment, though they should have." My father's eyes darted wildly. That's irrelevant." Aunt Pam exploded, her voice shrill. "You little snake!" She jabbed a finger at me. "You poisoned them against us. You made them think we didn't care." Judge Henderson cleared his throat. "Actually, Pamela, I reviewed Elizabeth's journals. She wrote extensively about each family member. No one poisoned her. She was very clear about her disappointments." Pam's face flushed purple. She turned on Uncle Steve. "Say something." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her eyes. "Pam, maybe we should listen." Her gasp of betrayal filled the room. My mother's mask cracked. "This is ridiculous. We'll contest. We'll win." "Not advisable," Matthew replied smoothly. He handed each of them a thick envelope. "These are the records that will become public if you proceed: banking statements, emails, even video evidence of items taken from this house after the funeral." Jason tore his open scanning rapidly. His smirk faltered. My father's hand trembled as he read, his face paling. My mother flipped through hers, her lips pressed tight. Aunt Pam slammed hers shut without looking, muttering curses. Chief Williams stepped forward. "And just so we're clear, this property is under 24-hour surveillance. Any attempt to remove items without permission will be treated as theft." Carlos nodded. "Footage is backed up securely. No blind spots this time." I took a step forward, finding strength in the silence that followed. "You accuse me of stealing family wealth. But the truth is, you've been stealing from this family for years. Grandma and Grandpa saw it. They planned for it. They trusted me to carry their legacy, not because I asked for it, but because I didn't." Jason's eyes burned into me. "This isn't over," he spat. "Maybe not," I said quietly, my voice steady now. "But it's the end of you taking advantage of them, and of me." The room held its breath. My father looked like he wanted to roar, but the weight of evidence, the presence of the judge, the watchful eyes of the chief, and the calm determination of everyone around me pinned him silent. For the first time, he looked small. One by one, they turned toward the door. Uncle Steve left first, muttering something under his breath. Aunt Pam followed, slamming her envelope against her thigh. Jason lingered, glaring at me with venom. My mother brushed past me without a word. My father was last, pausing in the doorway. "This isn't finished," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "No," Judge Henderson replied evenly. "It is." When the door closed behind them, the tension in the room broke like a snapped string. Dorothy exhaled shakily and poured more coffee. Rosa squeezed my shoulder. George patted my hand. But I didn't feel triumphant, only hollow. I had stood my ground. I had protected my grandparents' wishes. But in the process, I had lost what little remained of my family. The door shut with a heavy thud, and for a long moment no one moved. The air still crackled with the aftershocks of the confrontation. I stood in the middle of the living room, my hands still trembling, though I tried to hide it. My chest ached as though I had been holding my breath for hours. Dorothy broke the silence first. "Well," she said briskly, her voice quivering only slightly. "That's done. Now let's have some fresh coffee." She bustled into the kitchen, her familiar presence filling the void like sunlight pushing through storm clouds. The others began to stir. Rosa closed her laptop, exhaling as though she'd just stepped out of battle. George stacked his binders neatly. Carlos lingered near the door, arms crossed, watchful, as if expecting my family to return. I sank onto the sofa, burying my face in my hands. Relief and grief tangled inside me like knotted string. I had defended my grandparents' wishes, but I had also driven the final wedge between myself and the family I was born into. Matthew sat beside me, his tone gentler now. "You did exactly what your grandparents hoped you would, with dignity, with courage." My throat tightened. "It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like loss." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the two are the same." I lifted my head, eyes stinging. I kept waiting just once for one of them to look at me and see me. Not the money, not the inheritance, just me. The room was quiet. Then Rosa said softly, "Margaret, look around you." I did. Dorothy bustling in the kitchen, humming under her breath. Carlos standing sentinel like a silent guardian. Rosa and George, steady and calm. Matthew solid at my side. "These are the people who see you," Rosa continued. "Not for what you have, but for who you are. This is your family now." The words sank deep. Something loosened inside me, painful and healing at once. But even as comfort settled, unease lingered. Jason's final words replayed in my mind. "This isn't over." His glare, the way his lip curled, it hadn't been bluster. It had been a promise. That night, after everyone left except Carlos and Dorothy, I sat alone in the study. I opened one of Grandma's journals, tracing her handwriting. June 4th. Margaret brought lemon bars and helped Harold weed the garden. She stayed until the stars came out. She asked for nothing, gave everything. We are so grateful she sees us not what we own. Tears blurred the ink. I whispered into the quiet, "I hope I'm strong enough for this." The days that followed blurred together. Legal paperwork, meetings with financial advisors, phone calls from lawyers who backed down once they realized how airtight the evidence was. My father's threats sputtered out, though, not before he left a voicemail dripping with venom. "You'll regret this, Margaret. Don't think you've won." My mother tried a different tactic. She left a message with honeyed words. "Sweetheart, we overreacted. Families fight, but blood is blood. Let's sit down and talk about how we can move forward." I deleted it. Aunt Pam sent me a text near midnight one evening. "You've destroyed this family. Hope you're proud." I stared at it for a long time before turning my phone off. Jason was quieter, but his silence unsettled me more than their noise. In the meantime, something unexpected happened. The allies my grandparents had gathered didn't fade away once the crisis passed. They stayed. Dorothy continued to visit cooking meals like she always had for my grandparents. Rosa patiently taught me the basics of the company profit margins, shipping contracts, employee benefits. George walked me through investment strategies. Carlos fixed a leaky faucet without being asked, then lingered to tell stories about Grandpa, teaching him chess. Slowly, the house shifted. It stopped being a tomb of memories and began to feel alive again. One evening, Dorothy set a roast chicken on the table and said firmly, "Sunday dinners don't stop just because Harold and Elizabeth are gone. They'd want us to keep gathering." So we did. That first Sunday, the dining room was full. Rosa with her booming laugh, George telling stories about financial disasters narrowly avoided Carlos's wife and kids bringing homemade flan. The clatter of forks, the sound of overlapping voices, it all wove together into something warm. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a glimmer of belonging. Yet even in the laughter, a shadow lingered. Every time a car slowed near the house, my chest tightened. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for Jason's name. One night near midnight, I woke to a noise downstairs. My heart leapt into my throat. I crept down the hallway, clutching the flashlight on my phone. The kitchen was dark, but a curtain swayed as if touched. I froze. Then Carlos stepped into view. "Sorry, Miss Margaret," he said softly. "Just checking the locks again." Relief flooded me, but the fear lingered. He noticed. "They'll try again," he said simply. "People like that, they don't let go easy." I nodded, unable to argue. Weeks passed. The paperwork closed. The estate was legally mine. The company remained steady under Rosa's guidance. My parents retreated into silence, though I heard through whispers that my father had lost a contract and blamed me. Jason disappeared from social media for a while, then resurfaced with cryptic posts about betrayal. But inside the walls of my grandparents' house, something new had taken root. One afternoon, I sat with Dorothy in the garden pulling weeds. She glanced at me and said, "You know, Elizabeth always worried you'd inherit more than money, that you'd inherit their burdens too. But she also said you had Harold's backbone. She believed you'd carry it well." Her words made my throat ache. I realized then that while I had lost my birth family, I had gained something else, a chosen family stitched together, not by blood, but by loyalty, care, and love. Still at night, Jason's glare haunted me, his voice low and venomous. "This isn't over." And deep down, I knew he meant it. 6 months passed like a blur. Some days felt endless, filled with meetings, signatures, and decisions that carried more weight than I ever imagined. Other days vanished in a blink, swept away in the rush of building something new. The first weeks were the hardest. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing angry texts from my father, guilt-soaked messages from my mother, venom from Jason, dramatic rants from Aunt Pam. Then just as suddenly, silence. They'd realized threats and manipulation wouldn't work anymore, and silence somehow felt colder. But as they drifted away, others stepped closer. Under Rosa's mentorship, I learned the heartbeat of Alexander Logistics. I didn't take a management role, I wasn't ready, but I sat in meetings, asked questions, and slowly came to understand why my grandparents had worked so tirelessly. The company wasn't just trucks and warehouses, it was people. Employees whose kids had scholarships because of Grandpa's profit-sharing program. Drivers who had been with the company for decades because Grandma insisted on fair wages and retirement benefits. I made sure those values stayed. George taught me how to read financial reports without panicking. "Numbers don't bite," he joked, sliding spreadsheets toward me. "They just tell a story." He showed me how my grandparents' investments had quietly supported local businesses, schools, even hospitals. They had been generous without fanfare. I wanted to continue that. And so, with Matthew's help, I launched the Elizabeth and Harold Alexander Foundation for Education. We started small $10 million, set aside for scholarships, arts programs, and vocational training. The first scholarship ceremony was held in the renovated basement of my grandparents' house. 20 bright-eyed high school seniors stood in a line clutching envelopes that meant the difference between dream and reality. One girl, Maria Vasquez, came up to me after the ceremony. "No one in my family has ever gone to college," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This changes everything. For me, for my little brothers. They see it's possible now." Her words hit me harder than any accusation my family had thrown. This was what my grandparents had wanted, not money gathering dust in bank accounts, not status symbols. Impact. Lives changed. Seeds planted. At school, I returned to my kindergarten classroom. Parents blinked in surprise. Why keep teaching when I had millions? But the answer was simple. Teaching wasn't a job I did for money. It was who I was. My classroom blossomed with new supplies. I funded myself art sets, books, tablets. Every child had snacks waiting for them, coats in the winter, shoes that fit. I watched their faces light up when they held books of their own, and I thought, this is worth more than any inheritance. The house transformed too. With Carlos's help, the basement became a community space. Dorothy insisted on keeping the kitchen alive with Sunday dinners. Soon the table was full every week, Rosa George Carlos and his family Dorothy, with her ever-expanding casseroles. Sometimes neighbors joined, sometimes scholarship students. Laughter filled the rooms again, spilling down hallways that had once felt haunted. But I didn't pretend the pain was gone. On quiet nights, I still thought about my father's last words, about Jason's glare, about the cold finality in my mother's voice. Blood doesn't disappear just because you cut ties. It lingers like a bruise. One autumn morning, I finally gathered the courage to visit my grandparents' graves. I brought fresh flowers, placed them gently, and sat on the bench nearby. The air was crisp leaves, tumbling like golden confetti. "I'm trying," I whispered. "I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm trying." I told them about the foundation, the scholarships, the laughter in the house again. I told them about the journals, the allies, the way their community had become my community. My voice broke as I said, "I understand now why you chose me." It was never about the money. It was about the values, about carrying forward what you built. The wind stirred, brushing my cheek like a hand. For the first time since the accident, I felt at peace. Yet life has a way of keeping shadows close. A week later, I received a text from an unknown number. "Miss me, sis." Jason. My stomach twisted, but I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Matthew. He responded within minutes, "Ignore. We're prepared if he tries anything." But the truth lingered. Jason wasn't finished. Maybe none of them were. Still, fear didn't control me anymore. That night during Sunday dinner, as laughter rang around the table, I realized something profound. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty. Respect, love, freely given. I had lost the family I was born into, but I had gained one my grandparents had quietly been building all along. A family of choice, of shared values. As I cleared plates, Dorothy patted my hand. "You know they'd be proud of you," she said. For the first time, I didn't doubt it. My grandparents had left me millions, but the true inheritance wasn't wealth. It was community. It was resilience. It was the strength to say no when no one else would. And as I stood in the doorway that night, watching my chosen family leave with smiles and hugs, I whispered into the quiet house, "Thank you. I'll carry it forward." Because money reveals true colors, and mine finally were clear.